Hello everybody, and welcome to our Wave of Light structure deck release week. This week we're going to be doing some videos where we just want to talk about some of the different ways you can build your deck if you've just gone past the base structure deck and you want to get a little bit more out of it. And we're going to be gradually increasing the difficulty level of the videos and what the decks can do over the week, and we thought we could just go over some fun stuff that you guys could try with this new structure deck. Welcome back everybody to day 2 of our Wave of Light structure deck release videos. Today we're going to be looking at what happens if you want to go beyond the 40 cards in your deck, as we've seen very popular in tournaments recently with 60 card Lightspawn decks. If you wanted to take that step with your Wave of Light deck, we're going to take a look at some of the cool cards that you should be including and various different things we can do. Perhaps 60 cards isn't quite for you. We're also going to look at ways that you can take some of these powerful cards and slim it down to the traditional 40. So today everyone, we're going to be looking at what happens when we try and take our initial 40 cards up to 60 cards with a couple of more powerful cards to complement this archetype. Now, I will go back over some how you can slim this down to 40 cards, just playing the power cards, but I thought I'd show off something for a bit of fun that you guys can do. So we're going to be playing all the cards we played yesterday, and instead we're going to add 20 additional cards to our list. So we play our friends from yesterday, which is our Sacred Knights, our Meltiels, our Zeraldus, our copy of Honest, our 3 copies of Minerva. We're also going to be adding a new card, the Power Angel Valkyria. This card is extremely useful when you're playing larger decks because it lets you search for key things. Interestingly, with this card you can also search out the Zeraldus, which gives you another way of getting to the Sanctuary in the Sky for some of your more powerful counter traps. You can also search up various pieces you're missing, like Guiding Ariande. When we're going up to our 60 cards, we do have the room for 3 copies. We're also going to be going up to 3 copies of Bountiful Artemis. In this deck, we're going to be still abusing our 3 copies of Ties of the Brethren. We've got our 6 copies of Sanctuary in the Sky, also known as 3 copies of the Field Spell and 3 copies of the Sanctum of Parseth. We're going to be going up to 3 copies of Pot of Desires, because we've got room in our deck. We can chug straight through that as quickly as possible, give ourselves as many cards as possible to negate our opponent's cards. A new power card we're going to be adding to our deck is the Card of Demise. Card of Demise is an extremely powerful card that lets you draw up to 3 cards when your hand is empty. At the end of the turn you have to discard your whole hand. There's a couple of other drawbacks that come with it, but for the most part you're going to be able to play out your monsters, and then in the middle of the game play out your monsters, play out your counter traps, start interrupting your opponent, and hit on a nitro boost when you need to reload your resources, draw more counter traps, start setting them. And because you're gaining so many cards so quickly that prevents your opponents from playing, Card of Demise is extremely powerful in a deck that also you're generating additional advantages from just by negating your opponent's cards. Since we've increased the size of the deck, we're also going to be including some copies of Terraforming to complement our Zeraldus, to make sure we get to our Sanctuary so we can use the best of our counter traps. We're going to be looking at another counter trap for this deck, the Grand Horn of Heaven. Now, this card is pretty cool in the sense that you can negate a special summon, and you also end your opponent's main phase. Now, giving your opponent a card out of the exchange is usually horrible, even if you are doing something as powerful as negating a summon, but with the extra line of ending a phase, you prevent your opponent from doing things before they're allowed to battle and then make their best card exchanges or get damage through to you. So you get to buy quite a bit of time by ending their main phase 1. But the true strength of this card comes from the fact that this card, Evenly Matched, is a huge part of the competitive format. When your opponent is willing to go enter my battle phase, then use Evenly Matched, if you can get yourself into a situation where you Grand Horn of Heaven them during their main phase 2, and that takes them straight to their end phase. So you basically get to pass your opponent's entire turn if they want to use Evenly Matched. It's kind of one of those tricks you only catch your opponent out with once, because afterwards they'll set their cards in their main phase 2 before committing to special summons, but sometimes just catching your opponent out once can be all you need. Since we have gone up to 3 copies of Guiding Ariande, we're also going to be considering 3 copies of Ultimate Providence. When you don't have to discard for this card, it's extremely powerful. It gives you a huge range of negation options against what your opponent's trying to do, and if you know what your opponent's deck is capable of, because you've done your research, you will know the best steps to interrupt them with this card. We're still playing our Solemn Warning, Divine Punishments, all 3 copies, our Solemn Strikes. We are still playing Rebirth of Parsaf, but it is worth noticing there is some conflicts in this deck. If you're playing Card of Demise, at the end of the turn you have to throw your whole hand out, so you'll never have the card in your hand to reveal with this. So to offset that, you're going to have to set up plays with things like Minerva to then drastic drop off in your opponent's turn, then add a counter trap back to your hand, which then immediately allows you to use Rebirth of Parsaf again. So you've got to be a little bit more careful in a larger build when you're playing this, but you can still get the most out of it when you learn how to take the best of your additional resources that you get from using counter traps. We're still playing our free drastic drop off because I feel like this card is way too powerful not to play in this deck. The last 5 cards that we're going to be adding to this deck is a bit of removal options for your opponent. So we're still playing our copies of Storming Mirror Force. We're running out of room here, so we're just going to clear a line at the top here for you guys. So we're going to be taking advantage of our Sanctum of Parsaf. And the effect that it stops your opponent from targeting your spells and traps. So we can then start playing things that really start putting the work in against an opponent that attacks recklessly. We're also going to be playing Blazing Mirror Force. Now, if you have the Guiding Ariande in this deck, you don't end up paying any life point costs for your counter traps. You have more life points to play with Blazing Mirror Force. And then that actually, because your deck doesn't special summon a lot of monsters in a single turn, with the exception of Ties of the Brethren, it may take you more than 1 turn to reduce your opponent's life points to 0. So Blazing Mirror Force helps accelerate that by clearing your opponent's field and putting damage in. Now, something that is noticeable in this initial 60 card mock-up is we don't have that Grass Looks Greener in our deck, or Fairy Tale Snow. Both of these are things you can choose to include into your decks if you want to. The Grass Looks Greener gives you some cool plays with the Sanctum of Parsaf, where you then get to put many cards in your graveyard, including perhaps the Sacred Arknight Parsaf, and then you can use Sanctum of Parsaf to put counter traps that you want on top of your deck so that you get access to them. You can also use Fairy Tale Snow to then start interrupting your opponent during their turn. You then just get to change some of the ways you want to build the deck and things that you want to play. With the advantage of playing 60 cards is you have a lot of room to play, more options to deal with your opponent, because you end up in this type of deck having some real problems with ratios. You need to play, if you want to take advantage of Ties of the Brethren, you have to be playing enough fairies that are of level 4 light attribute to get the most out of it. But at the same time, you're actually being told by the deck to put as many counter traps in as possible to disrupt your opponent and gain additional cards from it. So you can't, you end up in this situation where your ratios end up so fixed that you don't have a lot of room to put specific cards in that you want to. By going up to 60, you can give yourself that bit of extra room to have more niche interactions. Of course, there's a couple of other things in this type of deck that you may find that clashes. Card of Demise and Ties of the Brethren. You can't special summon in the turn that you want to play Card of Demise, so there's a couple of things to consider. But say you don't actually want to play the 60 card version and you're very much set in the mind of traditional 40 is the best option. You can slim this down and then you can choose to focus on different power cards. You can choose to focus more on Card of Demise, in which case you want to be removing your Sacred Arknight, you can remove your Rebirths, and you could go up with your Bannerless Artemis. You can then put things like Force back in there to negate your opponent's normal summons. And you can play then Pot of Duality. You can also reduce the copies of Ties of the Brethren in the deck if you need to, and then go Pot of Duality in addition to give yourself a lot of consistency. Or you could focus more on Ties of the Brethren, maybe go up, remove the Card of the Mises, go up with things like Upstart Goblin or anything that lets you get through your deck very, very quickly. You've got a lot of options if you want to focus on different power cards. So I think that's just about going to do it for our 60 card version. There's absolutely so many options that you can do with building this deck. With the extra room of the cards, and the amount of draw power that you get from things like Bannerless Artemis, Pot of Desires and Card of Demise, you can certainly make it work, and you can also tailor it to whatever your players are doing in your local communities. So guys, thank you, and we'll see you next time. Thank you so much for watching today, guys. We hope you enjoyed the video. If you'd like to give us any feedback, please leave your comments below. We're always looking for feedback on these types of videos so we can improve the content we deliver to you guys. We hope to see you on our channel in the near future. Have a great day.